So this movie was made by a filmmaker who's among my very top favorites, a guy named Richard Rush. You guys know him? Stuntman, Freebie and the Bean, Getting Straight, Hell's Angels on Wheels, Savage 7. One of my favorite things about this movie, though, is the fact that you see a lot of these old drug cautionary movies, and they get to like the freak out scene or the bad trip, and it's the biggest anticlimax. This movie builds up to this drug freak out, bad trip scene. There's a couple of freak out scenes that are both great, but it builds up to the one that Susan Strasberg's character has, and it is so good. From the moment where like the camera falls off the tripod, like it's the most effective thing in the world. I've seen a lot of movies in this budget class, this really, really cheap budget class, and this movie achieves so many of its effects through intelligence, smarts, rather than money, and it looks like a much more expensive movie. But that great drug freakout scene, I'll say this, it's the best use of fire I've ever seen in a movie. Fire is really important. Actually, there's two movies that have great fire. And I'm going to talk about both of them in the next few minutes here. But the guest we have tonight, I'm so happy to have. I finished reading his book. I even gave him a blurb for his book. I was so thrilled with it. He's just written a great book about his experiences. A lot of these books that you read will kind of gloss over, like, oh, and then he made a biker movie. And then, no, Gary's book, like, if you read Gary Kent's book, it's like, he doesn't just talk a little bit about PSYCH-OUT. He goes on for like, I don't know, 15 pages about them with new details of PSYCH-OUT. It's, for me, it's like, it was gripping. I was just reading that book constantly. I wasn't like having any human interaction while I was reading that book. It was so good. It's called Shadows and Light. And I want to bring up the guy who plays Thug Number 1. He's the main stuntman and the stunt coordinator of this film, and he rigged all the fire effects and all the special effects in this movie, Gary Kent. For Weird Wednesday, you're going to find me at Book People at your book signing, where you're going to have a lot of guests, including most of the junkyard gang that you see in this movie is going to be here with you, and you're going to be signing your book, and you're going to be talking, and you're going to do a reading.
Right.
You're going to do a reading, and you're going to have a lot of guests.
Right. There'll be Bud Cardos, Bob Ivy, who played the Mummy and Baba Hotep. Bud did, as you say, Kingdom of the Spiders. Chuck Baio, who did the lead opposite Peter O'Toole and the Stuntman. These are all my buddies. They're going to be here just hanging out, looking for trouble on the parliament.
These are like the toughest old dudes on the planet, probably. Like, you do not want to start any shit with those guys. So this movie, you go into a pretty great detail about this movie in your book, and I was just enthralled. This movie was pretty important to you, I think, wasn't it? To get a chance to really work on a movie that was a real vision.
Yeah, it was for this reason. There were really only two. The psychedelic era lasted just a short while, but it was such a vibrant part of cultural history all over the world. And there were only really two movies. There were several psychedelic movies done, but there were only really two had any value at all. The Trip, which was written by Jack Nicholson, and starred Peter Fonda, Bruce Dern, and PSYCH-OUT, which also was co-written by Jack Nicholson and Hunter Willis. And if you were alive and in LA or San Francisco or Chicago or New York, Queens, during the late 60s, you're going to see this and go, oh yeah, now I remember, that's the way it was. If you weren't, then I can tell you this is the way it was.
That really sucks for those of us who have to live now. But I'm glad you had a good time.
I did. In fact, I did. Lars mentions the scene where our lead freaks out at the end of the film, and they wanted a fire sequence. And neither Dick Clark nor Richard Rush had ever done acid, and in this particular film, she's given acid by mistake, actually STP. And she goes on this incredibly horrible trip, and they just said, well, we want it to be a fire trip. And I thought, gee, you know what? I better take some acid and see what this is all about. So I did. First time I ever took acid. Scared me to death, huh? But it gave me the idea what to do for this film. So it's real. And this is before computer graphics, folks.
The cameraman on this was Lars Kovacs, who went on to make many fine movies.
Laszlo was one of the best cameramen in Hollywood, and he shot this. He shot many of Dick Rush's movies. But the last movie, or one of the last movies he shot, was Miss Congeniality, which was shot here in Austin.
Well, actually, he was at UT when he did that, and I went and he was doing a talk, and I was the one in the audience that was firing out all the questions about the great work he did, and everybody else was like, so what's it like to work with Sandra Bullock and Julia Roberts? So, but that was a great thing. He's passed on, unfortunately, but if you look at the camera work in this movie, it's unbelievably good. And he's doing a lot of handheld stuff, and he's pulling focus while he's running around with the camera. It makes it look like so much more immediate, and it really goes hand in glove with Richard Rush's style. Richard Rush, what was he like as a director?
Top notch. Richard was the best. I worked with a lot of good directors. Peter Bogdanovich, Monty Hellman,
Al
Adamson, Brian De Palma, but Richard was one of the best. He had the knack of being able to listen to. Steven Spielberg once said directing's like being packed to death. And it is, kind of, because everybody's at you all the time. What do you need this for, and what can we have that, and this should be brown and it's green, and oh, there's an airplane. It just goes on all day long. And Richard had the ability to take all of that in his head and still pretend like he was actually listening to you, and that you were important to him. And he was just very gracious. He was never a yeller or a screamer, but he was totally creative. And an actor's director also. He really was good with actors. Sure, well, Susan Strasberg was the daughter of Lee Strasberg, who was the head of the Actors Studio, which was the famous drama school that Brando came out of, so many good, Sidney Poitier. They all came out of the Actors Studio, and Susan, who's in this film, her father ran that studio. So she knew what acting was all about from the age of 2 or 3 on. Max Julien, you probably all know, one of the great breakthrough blaxploitation films was called The Mac, and the lead in The Mac was Max Julien, and Max is in this film. Henry Jaglom. So many of the guys in this film went on to direct themselves. Henry Jaglom was one, Bud Cardos. Bud and I played Thug number 1 and number 2. You're going to see a guy get in a fight with Jack Nicholson. That's me when my hair was dark and Jack had hair. And the second bad guy was Bud Cardos. So Bud's in it, and golly, I don't know, just a lot of good people.
Bob Kelgen also became a director. He's in this. He's the guy who finds Manny the louse on his shoulder. There's a lot of directors. Gary Marshall plays the cop.
Gary Marshall plays the cop. Bob Kelgen directed Count Gorka, or Return to Count Gorka.
Both. He directed both, and he directed Rape Squad. Jack Nicholson became a huge star. You can always see, in his early movies, you always see that he's this very motivated, and sometimes I think he was ahead of his time with his acting style. It was a little out of place sometimes, but in this movie, he seems to really be kind of coming into his own, and he really meshes with the film, except when he has to pretend he's playing the guitar, in which case he's totally unbelievable as someone who's even ever seen a guitar being played.
It's the worst. It's the worst.
It's really bad, but he's really good otherwise, so just give him a break, right?
Please.
So when you rigged all that, the fire, I found out something from talking to you that I hadn't realized. I was saying my 2 favorite fire scenes in movies are PSYCH-OUT, your great fire stuff at the end of this, and Werewolves on Wheels, where a bunch of stuntmen appear that they're trying to like burn themselves to death. And you rigged fire on that one too. So you rigged fire on both of my favorite fire movies. You're the king of fire in movies.
I love fire. I love burning things up. And I have to tell you, I think 6 or 7 months ago, Zach and Lars called me and said, gee, could you come and burn one of us on stage? And I was actually thinking about doing it. We were going to do it, and then we suddenly realized, and we wanted it to be a trick, so none of you would know that it was set up ahead of time. Then we realized there'd probably be 5 heart attacks, and we'd be sued by a bunch of people, so I couldn't do it.
I'm still willing.